Travis Barrett with the Gimme Camper. You'll have to excuse the barking dog in the background. I've already moved a couple of times trying to decrease that a little bit, but about every 30 seconds he keeps barking. I give up. So it's just gonna be part of what's going on here. This is a real quick video anyway. I just wanted to talk about an update to a project that I've done already. And that project was putting auxiliary backup lights on the camper. If you're gonna be anybody that goes into a campground after dark, I highly suggest doing this because it makes a world of difference whenever you're backing into a campsite. I will say that I've had a couple of different iterations of this. There's a couple of different ways that you can wire your backup lights. So you can wire them one to the battery that's on the camper and put a switch. If it's gonna be outside, of course, it needs to be a waterproof switch. And that works with a fifth wheel, it works with the travel trailer, it works with all that stuff. But the good aspect of wiring it directly to a switch on the camper is that it's always there. So even if your truck's not there, you can turn them on. But more so when you're backing in, a lot of times you'll have to get out, you'll have to check the site as you're backing in because it's dark. You're gonna be more careful than usual and you're gonna look around a little bit more. Well, if you wire them on the battery on the camper, they'll always be on. So when you get out and you're looking around the site, you'll have a little bit of light without having to rely as much on the old flashlight. The other way to do it, which is what I did on this camper, is I wired it to the reverse lights on the truck. Now the hardest part of that in the install, if I remember correctly, was actually finding the wire from the wiring harness that goes down inside the underbelly of the camper. I actually found it there in the propane bay. But I just had to go through them with a voltmeter and figure out which one was the reverse light. So I got all that done last time. I'll link that video here and I'll link a couple other videos of my previous projects with that. I will say that I really liked it on my old POS camper a lot better just because I had them wired on a rack on top with the final way that I had them there. And that way it would shine down, so it showed you a lot more area. And I really like that, and I wish I could do it to this without making a bunch of holes in the side or on the roof or anything like that, which I don't want to do. I do like having them wired to the truck because they're always on when you go in reverse. So even normal driving, you throw that sucker in reverse. You're at a gas station or something in the middle of the night, didn't quite have enough room to make that turn you thought you was going to, you got to back up a little bit, put it in reverse, you can see what's behind you, especially with the camera on the back. But the downside to having them wired with the truck lights is that once you take it out of reverse, you put it in park, then you ain't got no lights back there. So on those times where I'm trying to pull in a campground, I put it up in park, I get out, it's still dark as night outside and you don't have any light whatsoever to help you navigate that turn. Now I got a couple other tricks for that. One's an older video that I had with some glow-in-the-dark light sticks. I used the battery operated ones. I just got some new ones. We're gonna kind of redo that video a little bit, but I'm gonna put the original here, and hopefully after I get it redone, I'll add the new one up here too. So I've been thinking about this for a while, trying to find a solution where I could have the best of both worlds here. And I couldn't really put my finger on it. I have a friend that's got a YouTube channel, it's Michael Bracewell, and he suggested that I could use a double throw, double pole switch. I know just enough about all this 12 volt stuff to kind of be dangerous, so I looked into that. I couldn't find any definitive answers on how exactly those worked, and I didn't truthfully dig into it a whole lot. But what I did end up finding was a rotary selection switch. And so that's working really good, and we're going to go over how we installed it right now. So this rotary selection switch I did get off of Amazon. You know, we are Amazon affiliates. I do have the link for the product down below. It was a little bit pricey, but it was sub $15, I think. And for me, for the solution that it offered, I was happy with that. I will say it's way overbuilt for the application here, because I'm only burning a few LED bulbs and this thing's rated for 600 volts and I'm only using it for a 12 volt system. I do like that it's in a weatherproof box. I thought about mounting it outside, but going back to that, not really wanting to put any more holes in the outside, I did mount it inside, and I mounted it inside my propane bay because number one, it's never locked, so it's always easy to get to. And number two, it's out of the weather. And number three, half of the other connections that I needed to make were right there in that same bay. So that's why I went with that. At first, I'll tell you, I almost made a mistake and I was gonna mount it on the driver's side. But the problem with that is I saw some wires coming up that I had put in. You know, you do this stuff a couple years ago, you get a little rusty. And I thought, well, that's where the wires are and I'll probably put it there. But after I did a little bit more digging and I took the wiring out of the looming and everything to make sure that whole measure twice, cut once thing, that was actually the power wire that I ran for my side halo view cameras and not the backup lights. So you gotta be careful, know what you're doing. So after I figured all that out, I figured out that the wiring harness did come out on the passenger side. Easiest way for me to do it would be to watch my old video, but who's got time for that? But that's what you need to do. You need to go back and watch that video. So I will say that this plug seemed kind of confusing because it's not really made for this application, even though you think that it would be with the way it's labeled and everything. But looking at some Amazon reviews, I found somebody that had a picture here. I'm going to list their username, and that's where I got this picture from that helped me tremendously. So essentially with the switch, the way that I have it set up, we're going to talk about specific wiring details in just a minute. But the way that I have it set up is I cut the power wire coming in from the harness. There's nothing else on that reverse light circuit once I cut that wire, because I cut it to cut the reverse lights that come factory on the camper and the auxiliary lights. So I cut it before I spliced that wire in. I also had to add a couple of grounding wires, which I just took off of the same wiring harness. Technically, you know, the best thing would be to take them down and screw them into the frame of the camper. But I just added those two for no more than this is, just to the wiring harness that's already there. Shouldn't be an issue at all. And then I just looked at everything else during this wiring is truck lights coming in from the truck, or trailer power coming in from the trailer, and the load, which the load would be the LED lights that I'm powering. So all of that's going to play into part with the picture that we're getting ready to talk about. Also, it's best if you wrap your wires in wiring loom. I did wrap some of them in wiring loom, but the ones that are inside my bay do not have wiring loom around them, which I think that they're fine. It would also be preferable to put a rubber grommet or something in there through the wood that I had to make a hole in, just to help from rubbing. But that's something that I might have to go back and fix later. But it's working great for now, and I'm happy with it. As usual, I'm not a professional. This is not professional advice. It's simply what I did to my own equipment. Okay, so that wiring diagram that we just went through that was on Amazon, I changed it around for you guys so it would be a little bit more specific to what we're doing, and I'm gonna go over that with you right now. I'm gonna throw that sucker up on the screen here, boom. All right, so the first thing I did is I cut that hot wire coming in from the truck harness and isolated all 4 of the LED lights that I'm controlling, which include the 2 that I mounted in the front of the camper and the rear ones that are inside the brake lights. We'll just go over the rest of our basic connections here to start with and where I'm getting these wires from. Okay, so from the trailer, what I did is I wired a positive wire and negative wire from a distribution center that I have that has its own fuse there. And I think I put a 10 amp fuse. And so I put that in there. I have that right by my battery bank. That's just for lower load things that I have running. And it's only the second connection that I have on there, to be honest with you. And I think it's 10 gauge wire that goes from the battery to that distribution panel. So it should be fine, especially for this. So I ran those wires up along the ceiling in the crawl space because I had to go over to the other side of the camper, and I zip tied them in place. And everywhere where there wasn't anywhere to zip tie it to, I did use the little stick-on zip tie holder so I could stick it up to the ceiling, and those worked out pretty well. I did leave my wires a little bit longer, so I had to make a loop in that, but it made it easier to wire up, and I thought I was going to go back and shorten all the wires and make it prettier, but I didn't. So we just made some loops in the wires, and that way if I got to work on them again or something, it'll be a lot easier. So we have our harness wire ready, we have our trailer lights ready, and then we had the connection where the light that powers the load, which is the LEDs. So what we had to do with that is we had to splice a wire in there in order to make it long enough to reach the switch. Also, I will say that this switch is in my propane bay. It's only 12 volt. All those 12 volt wires were there to start with the exception of 2 that I added. I don't think there's going to be any sparking or anything like that. There shouldn't be any gas inside that compartment anyway. But I will say that I'm comfortable with this being there because it is in an enclosed box. All the wires are coming in from the top, and you know, I could seal that up a little bit if I wanted to, but it's protected like 99% from any sparking that could occur. But like I say, this is 12 volt, so I don't think that's going to happen. All goes back to do at your own risk wherever you decide to put it. All right, so back to our wiring diagram. So these switches are going to be laid out with the number of the terminal that they are, okay? And the number of the terminal is going to have like a little C shape, and it's going to have the number, and the number is going to be in the opening of that C shape, and that's basically going to be what terminal it's talking about is the one that's going to be on the open side of the C. All right, so I decided to start with my truck harness lights, and so I put the positive to terminal 1 and the negative to terminal 5. Positive to 1, negative to 5. Oh, this is also where I learned that 12 gauge wire was just a little bit too big for this. I could fit 1 in there, but you got to use a couple of jumpers here. I couldn't fit 2 in there and use 1 for the jumper. So I did go down to, I think it was 16 gauge wire, which again, is just a few LEDs. It's not going to be a problem. But that's what I ended up doing. Okay, then I hooked the wires coming from the trailer battery up, and I hooked the positive of that to 3 and the negative to 7. Positive to 3, negative to 7. Okay, so then we went over and I went ahead and hooked up the LED lights, the wire going to the load, which is the LED lights. Then I hooked the positive up to 2, and I went ahead and put about a 6-inch wire on there in with that to use for a jumper. And then I put the negative to 6, again, putting about a 6-inch wire in there for the jumper. After I tightened all those connections down, then I went to the other side of the jumper on those, and I went from the jumper that was in 2, and I put it at 4. I did shorten that so it would fit in the box real easy. You have to have it long enough to go all the way around the mechanism now. Then I went to the negative one, which was at 6, and I ran the jumper to 8, okay? So the jumpers go from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8. And then I thought, well, I'll try it, but you know my luck. Things never work the way that I want them to work. But I flipped it on to 2, which is the way that I wired it so that position 2 would be using the camper lights, which would be the way that I wired it so position 2 would be using the battery from the camper. And the lights came on, and I walked around and all 4 of the lights were on. So this made me very, very happy. Then my daughter came over, we put it back to 1, which is going to be the normal position of the switch because that's where it's going to work with the truck. So put it back over to 1, fired the truck up, put it in reverse, and all the lights came on. So everything's working great. I'm going to use it on a trip next week. We'll see how it does. If you got any questions, ask me down here. Go back and watch some of those other videos where I actually installed the lights. But these little LEDs are great. And you can get these small ones for pretty cheap. You need to do this to about any camper. And I will say that as much as I like having them on top where you see more stuff around you, I'm very comfortable with putting them in that J channel on the bottom because that's not really doing anything that's going to cause any water damage or anything like that. You don't have to worry about the seals or anything there. So guys, thanks for following me. Thanks for joining on this adventure, and hopefully you learned something. And if you want to do this, like I say, you can go down. I'll have some Amazon links down here for some wire and the switch and even the LEDs and stuff that I used. I have the Nylights. I've been happy with them. And so I also had some Z-Moons that I had a video of that was sent to me. And those worked really good too. They were a little bit bigger. But just for the backup lights, these little Nilights, just the little bitty ones, they seem to work out great.
Do not forget to hit that subscribe button.